Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkle SEND. As a former teacher in SENDCo myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Dan Tresman. Dan is the founder of Light Years Education Limited, the proprietor of an outstanding special school for children with a range of special educational needs, including autism, SEMH and associated difficulties. He was the founding head teacher of Light Years School in Fareham from September 2023 to April 24, and now is the Chief Executive Officer of Light Years Education Limited and acts as the chair of the proprietary board. Ofsted graded Light Years School as outstanding, only 10 months from opening in June 2024, which is quite an achievement. Prior to this, he led a residential special school from inadequate to good across education and residential care in 20 months, building meaningful and sustainable change. And he has held several other leadership positions, including executive head teacher, deputy head, DSL and SENDCo in residential specialist, day specialist provisions and mainstream school environments. A whole wealth of knowledge there, Dan. And he holds the MVQH and National SENDCo Award. Wow, welcome, Dan. Thank you. We're very privileged to have you on here. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So I've given a little bit of an overview of you, but always like to ask guests to tell us a bit more about themselves. So could you tell us about yourself, your career to date, and most importantly, why you're so passionate about supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, please?
Yeah, thank you. So I've actually been in education all my career, and for some reason, I always wanted to be a teacher. Even at school, I remember looking at the teachers, just thinking it was a really cool job, and I don't quite know why that appealed to me so much, but it did. And I think the passion started there and has grown and grown and grown over time. I got my first job in a special school as a
Yeah,
PE teacher, PE teaching being the thing that I was going to go and do. But after a couple of years there, the passion for sport was soon superseded by SEND.
yeah,
And I felt working with those kids, and it was a social emotional mental health school. Back then it was called EBD,
yeah, of
emotional
course.
behavior difficulties. Um, and real, just developed real strong connections and just found a love for it really. So then I pursued SEN, and from there became a SENCo. And I saw firsthand some of the battles that parents go through and schools go through to get the right support in place for children. That happened and coincided with the Code of Practice that was launched
Yeah,
in 2014. And so that was a really interesting time to be a SENCo, not only to start a SENCo for the first time, but be a SENCo as well. Then I went back into special, became a deputy head, and went on to be the head teacher of a school, a brand new school that we opened. But the real turning point was that head teacher role that you mentioned, from the inadequate setting, turning that around to good. That was a residential school, so special school. So we had social care and education at the same time, a monumental challenge, and I'm forever grateful for that opportunity. And then from then, decided to try and open my own school because that was always an ambition. And I really wanted to build a school that was truly inclusive for children, build a school where the values, the vision, the expectations were all governed by my own moral compass, which I knew was where it needed to be. And a school where child's best interests were always put at the centre of everything that we do, and ultimately, in control of that at all times. And also a school where, staff were treated and remunerated and rewarded properly. And I'd seen that happen at various different levels over time. And I just feel really passionate that we do such a hard job,
yeah.
such an important job, that we should try and create a culture and an atmosphere that's really, really supportive. So all of those things went into that sort of launch of Light Years Education.
Brilliant. That sounds absolutely amazing. And apologies, I was coughing. I've got got a tickle in my throat.
That's
Um,
right.
no, absolutely brilliant. So could you tell us a little bit more then about Light Years Education? Because that sounds fantastic. And you were the founding head teacher of the Light Years School. Yeah, tell us more about that, Dan, because it sounds fantastic. It's been so lovely hearing your passion for SEND. It's really interesting as well. A lot of people we have on here who are like specialists in their field in SEND, they all seem to fall in the same sort of it's pattern of like going into teaching and then really falling in love with teaching children with special education needs and seeing that they've always got a calling for it and going after that. And it's been really interesting listening to what you said.
Yeah, I certainly didn't chose it. I feel like it just
Yeah, chose
to be
you.
there, and it chose me in that sense. Yeah, so Light Years was founded by myself and launched
Yeah,
in March 2023. We found a building that was an unused part of a primary building, a
yeah.
primary school that's still existing. And we set about separating the two sites. We refurbished it, we registered it,
Wow.
and we got it ready for opening in the September 2023, so a few months later,
Whoa.
which, as you could imagine, was incredibly chaotic, wonderful journey.
Wow.
I like remember um, Ofsted called and notified us that they were coming to register the school, and we had building work up. We had it, the whole site was a building site, and I think we had like 2, 3 a.m. finishes. And I remember
Oh
hoovering
my
at 2 a.m.
goodness.
thinking, "Oh my Lord, what? How are we going to get this ready?" We made it then spotless. Ofsted came, successful. They left, and the site was back to a building site the next day. It was
That puts,
just
the normal Ofsted call, that puts it into perspective when you think of you guys there trying to like hoover up and move a building
yeah.
site.
I remember literally hoovering at 2 a.m. the night before,
Wow.
thinking, "Wow, this is one hell of a journey." But it was really amazing, and it was driven by the passion to get it open and do some wonderful things.
What an
So
incredible.
I was the founding head teacher and the proprietor at the same time. Um, and I wanted to be the head teacher right at the start because I just wanted the culture to be exactly how I wanted it.
Yeah,
To
yeah.
set those expectations. And with all the will in the world, recruitment's always a little bit unknown. You never quite know who's going to come through the door. But it turned out that we were just able to recruit the most amazing team.
Brilliant.
And they are really doing remarkable things, led by a fantastic head teacher. And, the child is really at the center of everything. And
Yeah.
I just get so much joy and I'm so proud of that, really.
That sounds
And the
phenomenal.
school's flourishing. Like you said, we were rated outstanding in our first Ofsted, which
What
I
is she?
wasn't necessarily expecting, but incredibly proud of. It's something that was really quite rare. And
Yeah.
when they said that to us, well, as you can imagine, it was a real monumental moment, really. And it just showed us that we have really built what we set out to build, and that's a
Yeah.
truly inclusive setting. And one of the quotes in the report is inclusion is at the heart of this school. And for me, those words were just really magical to read.
Yeah.
Um, but it doesn't happen by accident. It's a really every single aspect of the school is really carefully considered and really focused on. And I think all of that just has a cumulative effect over time. So it's been an incredible journey so far. And we feel like we're just getting started. Really, we've got some exciting plans for the
Yeah.
future, and we're just carrying on doing what we do, really.
Amazing, absolutely incredible achievement, Dan. Brilliant. And I suppose what's really interesting about having you on, we've had lots of mainstream settings on here, and talking and lots of other people talking about sort of the difficulties that mainstream are facing at the moment, whilst we await the white paper. And beyond, sort of, with the long waiting times for assessments, difficulties with VHCPs, etc. But I think it'd be really interesting to hear your perspective on what difficulties specialist settings are facing. Because you've spoken about all the positives, which are brilliant, but you obviously must still be facing some difficulties in your settings. So, like in your experience, what are the biggest problems that specialist settings are facing at the moment?
Well, I don't think like some of them will be different from what mainstream are facing, but some of them
Yeah,
are quite
pretty much
similar.
the same.
And
Yeah,
we are part of the same educational system, and sometimes we sometimes forget that and think that we're
yeah,
two separate things. So I think one of the things is capacity
hmm,
um, of placements. The demand far exceeds the places, so
yeah,
the pressures in on specialist settings to process sometimes hundreds of referrals each
yeah,
term and really try and support as many of those children as possible is a real challenge. Um, the other thing is the complexity of need.
yeah,
We have seen the complexity of need develop and increase over time, certainly in my career.
yeah,
Um, and we therefore are already catering for the most complex of needs.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds silly being because we're a specialist setting, you might think that we should be able to cater for that, and that's what we do. But we're still a school at the end of the day. We still have
Yeah.
all the same, regulatory requirements that we have to meet as mainstream schools. We're still under the same Ofsted framework, and all of that's for good reason. Um, but we are also having to adapt and evolve and develop our teaching practice and environments. And just because a child arrives to us in a specialist setting doesn't mean that suddenly everything's resolved. Barriers to learning
Yeah.
automatically lifted. Um, that's far from the reality, and I think therefore some of the increasing complexity of need is being felt across all sectors.
That's
Um,
really interesting. And that is
yeah,
something you think about because we've spoken about it from the other side, with mainstream settings, trying to get children into a specialist setting because they feel like they can't meet their needs and they've got more complex needs coming into their school. But it's almost been thought as if like, but they go to specialists, you guys are the experts there, it's sorted now. But you're saying as well, you're experiencing these difficulties with more complex needs. And yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I'm learning.
and it's not necessarily something we can't do. We absolutely
Yeah.
can. We do it very well, but we're just constantly having to adapt and develop our own practice as well.
Mm. Yeah.
um, you know, Reviewing our interventions, reviewing everything else. And we are blessed with smaller class sizes and we've got good staff ratios and stuff, but it doesn't stop the complexity of need increasing, changing over time.
Yeah.
So it's just quite an interesting viewpoint in that sense. The other thing is time, which I'm sure is very relevant to everyone. The process for assessing children for independent specialist settings is huge, huge time and often huge delays within that, despite tribunal
Yeah.
proceedings. And I think this impacts on families more than anything rather than
Yeah.
our type of
Okay.
settings, families and children. Um, and trying to figure out the solution to that is very, very complex. But even when a child has decided that they are able to access or need that specialist provision, the hoops that people then have to jump through to get to a specialist setting is incredibly hard, and that's what causes delays on both sides.
Yeah.
And the longer it takes, the more potential damage can be done.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Completely agree. And we've seen so far the government seems to be wanting more mainstreams. I think we can say this is safe to say what's going to come in the reforms, that they want mainstream schools to be more inclusive, which is great. But I suppose I'd be really interested to know how you see the role of specialist settings evolving alongside mainstream education in the future.
yeah, I mean, firstly, more inclusive mainstream environment is 100% what we should all be aiming for. And the government and us as education professionals are absolutely right to be focusing on that.
Yeah.
Um, the overwhelming need, the increasing complexities, the limited specialist placements available, there is a need here that is rapidly growing and has been growing for over a decade. And there are significant challenges that mainstream schools will face when it comes to meeting more need, and that
Yeah.
is meeting the complex needs themselves, not just meeting them, but providing exceptional levels of education for those children.
Yeah.
I'm really, really passionate about the difference between simply meeting basic need. Okay, we've got a send resource unit, brilliant. Is that room over there? That's different from a child thriving and flourishing in education and in their environment.
That's
And there's a
such a good point. Like, is meeting their needs really what we're aiming for? It's not, is it? We should be
It's
aiming for them
not.
to
We
flourish and
should be
thrive. That should be the very, yeah, it's not what we're aiming toward at
exactly.
all.
We should be aiming much, much higher, and it's a balance that has to be got right. And the danger is, if we don't get that right, we'll have a reduced cost possibly across the sector. Brilliant. We've got one aim done, but we've got a whole raft of children that are disconnected or haven't realised their potential.
Yeah.
And I'm really a big believer in just because a child's got SEN, we shouldn't be putting any sort of barrier on any expectation. The
Yeah.
expectation should be higher, if anything, than anything else, because the kids deserve that, the children deserve that.
They really do.
So the drive has to be, for me, drive has to be what's in the child's best interest rather than trying to reduce funds, for example.
Yeah.
Um, and specialist settings too have to evolve, alongside it to provide what they need. And in an ideal world, we'd evolve together, side
Yeah.
by side, in collaboration, because we're part of the same system. And specialist settings have been doing this for years and years and years, meeting the most complex need. And as such, we've got a huge wealth of knowledge. And I think we're really, really well placed to share that, and continue to do that. But do it better as well at the same
Yeah.
time.
No, I agree. I'm just reflecting on what you said as well about that sort of the meeting the needs not being what we're aiming for. And I think that's such a good point, isn't it? Like as a parent, you don't send your children to school just hoping that their needs are met. That's not what it needs to be far more than just needs being met. It really does.
It does, and
Basic needs.
the complexities around that are really interesting. Schools like mine that, and I'm one of many schools. Light Year School is one of many
Yeah.
schools out there doing amazing things. Part of that for me is when children enter Light Year School, as they would enter another specialist setting, they access the entire school.
Yeah.
They eat in the canteen or in the hall that we have.
Yeah.
They they have so many different adaptations needed to make that happen, but the vast majority of them do that.
Yeah.
They access PE. So many families, parents come to us and say, oh, they haven't done PE, because they can't access it.
Yeah.
That's not meeting need.
No, not at all.
That's that's coping. That's sort of most basic. They're okay here, but it's not flourishing. And when they
Yeah.
flourish, the children are incredible. They're
Yeah.
absolutely incredible, and that's what we should be aiming for,
Completely
not
agree.
just not just the basics. And I'm so passionate about that. It's untrue.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you.
That's
Yeah.
one of my biggest fears about the white paper,
Yeah.
sent forms, is that it's been driven by possibly funding. So therefore, it's going to be rushed in, and possibly the basic needs might be met or not, as the case may be. But will the children be flourishing
Yeah.
in the right environment? And you know, proof will be in the pudding, I suppose. But that's not what we should be aiming for. We should be having the highest expectations.
Completely agree. Yeah. And I think if you've got specialist schools listening to this now, what are some practical ways they can work with mainstream schools to sort of share their expertise and resources?
Yes, I think first and foremost is probably the easiest way of doing this is for shared opportunities for training, for
Yeah.
CPD, because we are doing CPD for ourselves all the time. There's some
Yeah.
practical sort of things to consider that in our CPD we'll be talking about particular children. So if we're sharing that knowledge, we can't share that aspect of it. But I think there's ways around that if the will is there to do so.
Hmm.
So I think all of our knowledge about social emotional mental health, autism, trauma informed, adaptive teaching practices, could be delivered through shared twilight sessions, inset
Yeah.
days, joint training programs, staff shadowing opportunities. And I think that's probably, that was one thing that came through the DFE engagement events was CPD for teachers and initial teacher training,
Yeah.
especially. And I think we've got that knowledge, and I think we should and could be sharing that more. Um, I will talk about some of the barriers maybe a bit later to
Yeah.
doing that. The other thing I was thinking, and mainstream schools I know are crying out for, is outreach support.
Mm.
Um, and quite often, actually, when an EHC is in place and finally in place, that support tends to drop off.
Yeah.
Whilst children are waiting for either special provision or alternative placements or change
Yeah.
of placements, and
That's
that's
a good point.
possibly where we can share some of that knowledge and in a very, very practical way. Um, either sharing specialist teachers, therapists alongside mainstream staff to model strategies, support planning, advice and provision, just to help stabilize those placements and hopefully then support them enough so that they don't need a specialist placement, like mine. But if they do, then that has to be the driving force, whatever's in that child's best interest, and,
Yeah.
and nothing else matters. But particularly while um, pupils are awaiting a change of placements, or it's clear that need can't be met, instead of reaching crisis point, trying to get that
Yeah.
outreach support in place before that. And then I think another major thing that we can do is help with the environments of mainstream schools,
Yeah.
and the environmental setup, especially if a school is thinking about setting up a resource unit or a
Yeah,
send.
which we know lots are going to now. The government's been talking about them a lot. Yeah.
Absolutely, that's going to come across, but that has to be done right if it's going to be
Yes.
effective. And people need to know how to do that. And I'm not saying that special schools get this right all the time, but we do have different environments.
Yeah.
Um, and when it's done right, that cumulative effect of all of those tiny things that we do, and some of them are minute but have really big impact. I think we can really impact and support in that way as well. And I've mentioned CPD, initial teacher training. So many teachers join the profession, never had experience of that, but
Yeah.
now will be expected to be catering for some really complex need almost on day one.
Yeah.
And so to include some of that information during that initial teacher training would also be, I'm sure, very welcome.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant advice. And we've said in the DFE engagement events online, we've noticed, haven't we, that they're talking about how mainstream and specialist settings can work better together. So it's good to have some ideas that maybe they can listen to this podcast, Dan, and learn from you on that one. That would be really useful for them, maybe. So could you give us an example, like from your school, how you've done it then? So a successful collaboration between light years education and a mainstream setting. Is there any examples you can share of where you've got it right?
Yeah, well, we do try and get involved as much as we can. I mean, we are 2.5 years into our life
Yeah.
cycle as a school, so we've had limited time to do this. But we've had professionals come and visit our schools. We sort of try and be proactive on visiting other settings as well. I personally deliver the MPQ SENDCo qualification,
Brilliant.
in line with a partner. Um, I'm a facilitator on the course. I
Yeah.
don't actually for it. But that's a real privilege to
Mhm.
support sort of the next generation of SENCos coming through, and it's such a pivotal stage nationally in what
Yeah.
we're doing. So that's really good. But we're actually launching. Um, we're gathering interest this term and launching something in the summer called
Yeah.
an Inclusive Schools Network.
Amazing.
Um, and we're really excited about it. It's designed to support mainstream settings with their with their SEND provision, basically offering free CPD opportunities, offering opportunities to come and visit independent special schools, sorry, just to see how we operate. Not that we're all singing or dancing at
Yeah.
all, but just to sort of say, come and have a look at what we do, and we can talk through some of the things that we do, and then you can adapt and take them away to suit your setting.
Brilliant.
And it's in its infancy stages now, but we are sending out some information to gather some feedback really on it to see if there's a genuine sort of need there. And
Brilliant.
we might be working with other special schools around our local area to deliver that.
Fabulous. I'll
Um,
put a link in the notes to that, Dan, and then if anyone's interested, they can click on
yeah,
it and find out
more
more.
than welcome. We really want to try and be a force for good, really,
Yeah.
in the community, and things like focusing things on really practical things like attendance plans. How do we do attendance for children that really struggle to attend school?
Yeah.
That's really useful. And how do we evidence impact, and so that those children aren't seen as a negative point on a data sheet.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, we can show amazing progress, and it really brings the child back into the center.
Yeah.
Behavior inclusion plans and whole school cultures and a whole range of different things that we think we could really share some knowledge on, really. So that's a really exciting thing that we're going to do, and hopefully that will launch and be successful, and we'll be able to really generate some really effective collaboration.
Fantastic. That sounds brilliant. And how do you think then mainstream teachers can benefit from the approaches and strategies used in specialist environments? Do you think you're using different strategies and, and vice versa? Like, do you think they can learn from these strategies a bit more?
Well, I think there's no doubt that specialist settings are more specialized.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true to say. But having worked in both and having employed a team that's worked across both, I think there's a misconception, like I said earlier, that
Mhm.
special schools are wildly different from
Yeah.
their mainstream counterparts. And for settings like mine, we cater for children with autism, social emotional mental health, and other complex needs. The basics aren't all that different.
No.
We are absolutely working under the same framework, delivering the same national curriculum and everything else. But what we do, and I think what mainstream schools can gain from specialist settings like ours, is a really concrete set toolkit, a
Yeah.
set of tools that support visuals, routines, waiting times, sensory issues that help all learners really, not just those with EHCPs,
Yeah.
access the learning in the way that they want to access. And we do so much stuff around that. The other thing I mentioned earlier was about the environmental setup, the way the classrooms are set up
Yeah.
and structured are very trauma informed and focused on child well-being and mental health rather than your traditional sit in rows type thing. And there's
Yeah.
some really wonderful people out there doing amazing things with trauma informed
Yes.
classrooms. So that's really interesting, and it feels very different when you walk into light years school compared to a mainstream school down the road. There are some really fundamental differences that make all of our visitors pretty much say, it feels so calm here, it's so
Oh,
lovely.
how lovely.
Um, and we can really, I think mainstream teachers can really benefit from some of that if they saw that. We
Yeah.
also use a huge multi-sensory approach to learning,
Yeah.
driven by one of our dyslexia specialists. And even though we're not a dyslexia specialist school, we utilize some of those strategies very, very well, and they work with all of our children exceptionally well. So that's really amazing and really, really beneficial. But there's so much stuff like even an increased confidence in de-escalation,
Yeah.
co-regulation, and how that looks and how that operates, so that when a child in mainstream has a significant moment of deregulation, it's not it's not look at this, we've got a serious problem here. It's actually we know how to do this. We've
Yeah.
seen it done. We've had experience in it now. We know the methodology around co-regulation, and we can do that, and we're really confident so that that child feels ultimately feels safe.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing that we do really well that I think is going to become more relevant is demonstrating the really small steps of progress
Yes.
that aren't actually small steps of progress in the slightest. They're
No.
monumental shifts, monumental moments of progress for the child. But what typically we might, as typical educators, sort of deem lower than the academic progress of a child, for example, and how we measure that and how we present that to Ofsted, which is a fundamentally important. No one does things for Ofsted, but it's also important to be able to demonstrate those things
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
well when they do arrive.
Oh, I love the examples. They're brilliant. And I think a lot of them, like it's that whole thing, isn't it, for mainstream settings as well, is like making it good for children with SEND makes it good for everybody, doesn't it? And it's things, you're saying like making your classrooms being lovely and calm. We know lots of children in mainstream settings who are perhaps neurodivergent, for example, might find the school very, very overwhelming and overstimulating. And there's quite a lot of simple tweaks we can do to make it better for them. And we need to start at that point for everybody. And it doesn't make it worse for anybody else by doing that. It's true inclusion, isn't it? Starting with children with SEND first and making it suitable for them, and then it will be suitable for everybody. And I think I liked what you said as well about visuals, because we've got twinkle symbols and we've been, trying to get that in it's been in lots of mainstream schools are using it as our specials, but it's really important having like visuals. It's not no disadvantage to anybody to have visuals up all the time and when you're talking and when you're communicating things, but it's for those children that need it, it's absolutely fundamental. And I think it's that mindset, isn't it? It's that flipping and thinking about those children first and how you can make the setting more inclusive.
It is, and our environment's actually a really good example of that because
Yeah.
when you think visuals, you may typically think of non-verbal children needing those
Yeah.
visuals to communicate. But actually, it's far from that, and we don't have non-verbal pupils with us at school. So not all the children access them in the same way,
Yeah, exactly.
but they will do on their own level, and
Yeah.
therefore that's what makes it inclusive. So if they don't need to, it's part of the culture of the school. We are a primary school before, but I've used it in all my schools. So primary, in the last couple of schools that were secondary, and children and young adults access them on different levels. And actually, because we're all working at different times, even me um, adult would ask them, and I would probably look at the symbol rather than the text below because that's
Yeah,
the
that's
way
really
that it
interesting.
operates. Now I'm doing that subconsciously,
Yeah,
but if I'm doing that as an adult, why can't a 16-year-old who might need that do that as well? So
yeah,
there's different ways of doing it, and there's different types of visuals that can be much more aimed at older children than younger
yeah,
children. And, there's a whole raft of things that children and schools can do without alienating either or and being very, very inclusive. And I
yeah,
think vice versa, we all, like I say, the majority of staff that are in my school have either come straight from mainstream or have significant mainstream experience, and that's hugely valued.
yeah,
The curriculum quality, the coverage, the content, the ambition, setting those really high expectations. That's something that we have then adapted and learned from mainstream to
love
make
that.
sure that our curriculum is really, really ambitious for our kids.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that you've reflected on that. So I think that's really important. I think our mainstream teachers will be pleased you've mentioned that as well. Now, there must be some barriers though, because we're saying this is all, they should be doing this and they can learn from these people and this can be helpful. But what barriers do they face? What can prevent sort of these stronger partnerships between specialist settings and mainstream schools? If we've got specialist setting teachers at the moment listening to this or mainstream thinking, I want to get in touch with a local specialist school and do some more work with that, what are the barriers that they might face, and how can policy or sort of leadership better support this collaboration across settings?
Yes, I mean, I think there's some real fundamental sort of basic barriers, and that is times
Yeah.
time. It's always time, but timetables and workload. And what I mean
Yeah.
by that is sort of very, very limited protected time for joint work.
Yeah.
Um, Both mainstream and special settings are incredibly busy places. There's so much, so many different aspects to running a school. It's a very complicated ecosystem with its challenges of themselves,
Yeah.
regardless of what setting you're in, staffing shortages or attendance, regulation, stakeholders, parents, Ofsted, it's a whirlwind of things. And actually operating under that sort of significant pressure all of the time without protected time, that collaboration can sometimes be seen as an added burden or
Yeah.
a second thought rather than an integral part of school improvement.
Yeah.
And some schools do it very, very well. Other schools struggle, and different schools are on different journeys themselves. You know, uh, I know from taking on an inadequate setting before that you don't really have time to think of
Mm.
anything apart from just getting some really safe
Yeah.
structures in place, basic, teaching quality and things like that. So the time for collaboration is actually sometimes a secondary burden. So that's a huge barrier. Obviously, funding is always going to be a bit of an issue. Um, and in the sense of budgets don't allow sort of that release time.
Mm.
Um, Teachers are such valuable resources. Excuse me. Um, and I think possibly working under very tight regulatory performance measures has
Yeah.
an impact on this. Um, and possibly with greater understanding and empathy towards the challenges around SEND. For example, attendance.
Yeah.
Attendance for some SEND children. Um, Working under that pressure doesn't necessarily or work in our favour.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, hopefully, I really hope that with the inclusion of inclusion on the new framework, this will open up a lot more inclusive culture. But I think it could have done more
Yeah.
to do that personally.
Yeah.
But, from what I hear from when listening to inspectors and listening to the more senior people in Ofsted, then they seem to understand it, and proof will be in the pudding over the next year or a couple of years, really, to see how that all goes.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Um,
Completely. So, right, and I've only got a couple more questions for you, Dan, but one of them, if you could change, this one's tricky. If you could change one thing and one thing only tomorrow to improve SEND support across all schools, what would it be? What would your one thing be?
well, um, I'm tempted to say money, funding, but I feel like that's a bit too. obvious and something that we all know would be wonderful, but we don't operate in a
Yeah.
that world all the time. So something very practical, doable. It's something quite a bit more personal to my specialist sector,
Yeah.
in the independent special sector. And if I could change one thing, I suppose it would be for outstanding specialist settings, including outstanding independent specialist settings and good settings, not just outstanding, to be better represented on the national scale,
Yeah.
driving more involved in driving national send reforms and
Yeah.
improvements. I feel like if we were able to sit alongside mainstream professionals on advisory panels and lend our expertise, our highly specialist knowledge and of the sector that we've been doing for many years, we could really impact the future in a really positive way. And I
Yeah.
still feel that we've been, with all of these send reforms happening, I think there's been a lack of representation on our part. So that's what I would love. We've been filling the gap for provision for so many years now and doing such amazing things. And I do know there's wider implications around cost and funding for placements. I'm very well aware of that. But if we just focused on the knowledge and the skills that we
Mhm.
have in that sector, and if we were better represented on that national scale, we could have a profound impact. And I know that we could really, really do some really great things at creating a more inclusive educational environment. We could move from this sort of reactive way that we work now to a more proactive
Yeah.
pattern of work, I'm sure. So if I could change one thing, it would probably be that.
Yeah, I love that. That in turn would solve everything in theory. It
Well,
would
maybe
solve
not
solve
everything.
lots of
We
things,
could
though,
aim high.
maybe.
We could aim high. We certainly could.
Putting you on a pedestal there, Dan. Saying Dan will solve everything. Just get him listened to on that one. Um, but what advice would you give then to mainstream school leaders who might be listening or watching who want to strengthen their SEND provision, but they don't know where to start? So if there's someone listening who's thinking, right, I do, on reflection, my school isn't inclusive enough. We've got lots more children with more complex SEND need coming into school, perhaps in reception or coming into school and resource provisions that they're going to set up, whatever. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think this has to start with how you set your culture.
Yeah,
You know, from the most basic level, if you do things that are in the best interest of the child and no other reason, then you're going to be onto a winner. If you champion children with SEND and genuinely champion them, if you believe in them and you
yeah,
show them that you care and you believe in them and you've got their back and you're there for them, then that is your first step. And if you don't have that, it's always going to be a second thought. And I
yeah,
remember walking into a school once and um, walking around, and they said, "This is our send room or a send support room or something." And I remember looking at it, and it had an old piano in it. It had some storage boxes. It had some PE mats that were should have belonged in the hall, different tables, different chairs. And I just looked at it and thought, if you put me in this room, you're giving me a very, very clear message, and
how
the
the kid.
message is not this person's cares about me. This school cares
Yeah,
about me. So getting the environment right. Second bit of advice, absolutely. Reduce overload,
yeah,
reduce stimulation, have as much high staff ratio as you can, but improve the specialist intervention, suitable breakout space, low sensory environments. Try and get that really right.
yeah,
So set the culture, get the environment right. Third bit of advice would be to keep expectations high.
yeah,
Don't lower expectations just because this child in front of you is presenting with challenging behavior or deregulation, um, or they've got a special educational need. Those children deserve the best outcomes. And the
yeah,
second we lower the expectations, we send a really clear message to them. So keep
yeah,
those expectations high. Get the classroom environment, not necessarily the environment, but the teaching staff to really be able to deliver very simple, consistent level routines, clear
yeah,
visuals, get the basics right. Involve a multi-sensory approach if possible, which is possible to do in both
yeah,
mainstream and special, so that you can gradually promote independence, but
yeah,
builds on the fundamental basics of feeling safe, does this child feel a sense of belonging when they walk into school? You know, that Maslow hierarchy of needs that we talk about all the time. You know, if that environment is right at the bottom of that, then all of the other things can start to happen.
Yeah.
Um, and I suppose the last bit of advice would be partnership and collaboration, and try and partner with a local specialist school for focused outreach or just advice, because that's going to proactively help this collaboration between the two sectors. And of course, you could join our inclusive schools network if that's, but depending on where you are in the country, there are plenty of specialist schools out there doing wonderful things. And the specialist school that you might partner with will undoubtedly benefit from mainstream expertise like we have.
Yeah.
And so much you can't underestimate. It's not just mainstream schools learning from specialists, even though we do, have a lot to offer. It's absolutely the other way around as well.
No, I love
And I
that.
think that would foster the collaboration.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love what you're talking, like a lot of the changes you're suggesting and things that they need to do to strengthen the sort of SEND provision. It's just getting those sort of foundational things right, isn't it? Like the things that thinking of the child and thinking what do they need to be happy to thrive in a classroom and be able to, to feel welcome and feel belonging, all of those really important things, as opposed to this shiny new bolt on, we'll buy this thing and this will solve everything. It's like actually no, just think right from the start, how do you make your classroom welcoming? How do you sort it out so it's not overstimulating? How do you make sure you have visuals? It's all of those sort of foundational stuff that makes a massive difference. I think that's really important.
It's not necessarily it's not necessarily what you might think. So a big
Yeah,
sign saying welcome, welcome to our classroom, or I'm just picking out that example really,
yeah,
but that those bright colors, lots of stimulation that we as neurotypical adults might think, oh, that's really welcoming. It might not actually, it might cause
yeah,
greater deregulation. So it's sort of going into specialist settings, seeing how their environment operates and
yeah,
taking some of that back in. I've been walked into many a primary classroom, especially in recent years, and myself, having come from an environment like ours, wow, there's so much stuff going on in this
yeah,
classroom. Immediately, wonderful, beautiful displays, but really big, really colourful, not necessarily relevant to what's happening in that moment in the
yeah,
so in that classroom at that moment, so quite distracting, a whole load of stuff. And that's where we can really support and
yeah.
say, think about this, think about that.
No, I like that. And it's like what you said at the start when you said visitors go into a school and they think it's calm, and kids will feel the same, won't they? And it's the kids that
Exactly.
are going in there who will feel that calming environment. And they should have that everywhere. They should be able to have that wherever they are being taught. Finally, then, your vision. What's your vision then for how specialists and mainstream schools can work together to ensure that all children not just meet their needs, but all children thrive?
Yeah, so I think in an ideal world, it would be sort of a connected educational ecosystem where the child's needs are always kept at the center of everything. That's what we do, but where the child's needs drive the right support rather than the funding,
Yeah,
and where all of that can come together. I think where an educational system that recognizes and reflects how the lives of children have changed and evolved over the last decade or two, because it's increasingly complex to be a child these
yeah,
days. Um, and I speak about that quite a bit as well. And if we're increasing complexities, but we're trying to fit them into the same inflexible system and regulatory criteria as we've always done, well,
mm,
that's exceptionally challenging and
yeah,
probably even impossible. So we just want to reflect how life is changing, and
mm,
a full and open collaboration between mainstream and specialists, which would be unbelievable when knowledge is shared, used, adapted, exchanged, and developed. Um, and that culture has to be set right from the top, just like in any school, in any organization, right from the DFE, around these SEND reforms. It's going to be really, really very interesting to see whether they capture that
yeah,
in their entirety.
brilliant.
And of course, assessing success, not only on academic
Yes,
progress, but
completely agree.
looking at belonging, looking at progress, looking at preparation for adulthood, personal development. And there
Yeah.
should be less pressure on it, sort of the narrow attainment measures that
Mm.
schools are measured against, and
Yeah.
greater value placed on the progress, engagement, and emotional development of children. I strongly believe that, and we demonstrate that in our inspections to Ofsted very, very well, and it's really welcomed. And if that was welcomed in your mainstream schools as well, in the same way, then again, I think that's a shift in the right direction. If we can do all of that, then you know
Absolutely.
it's undoubtedly going to have an impact. And if it was as simple as that, it would be wonderful. But that's my
Brilliant.
vision. That's my
I
vision for it.
absolutely love your vision. I think it's fantastic. And thank you so much for being such a brilliant guest. I'm sure our listeners have learned loads from you, Dan. It's been really, really useful. And I think people will take a lot away from this. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much for having me.